Yes, we are streaming. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeremiah Adams, part of the Tampa Clearwater Baha'i community. And this is the 5th session we've done with Eileen, Maddocks, and Peter Terry on the Pentateuch, the Holy Bible. A real brief summary of who Eileen Maddocks is. She is an independent scholar who wrote and self-published her first book, 1844, Convergence and Prophecy for Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the Baha'i Faith, which explored expectations in the West of the return of Jesus Christ and in the East of the return of the 12th Imam, the Promised One. So there's much more. You can find more information about her on our website, clearwaterbaha'is.org. So just go there and type in Eileen Maddocks. And the second presenter with us today is Peter Terry. Peter Terry is also an author, teacher, and scholar with 8 published books, 4 chapter publishes in books, and 50 papers available online. And there's a more thorough bio for him on the website as well. And with that, Eileen, please take it away.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think I need to hit share. And then I need to hit my PowerPoint, slideshow, and I think we are here. Who were the Canaanites? The short story is that the Hebrews emerged from the Canaanites. The longer answer, the Hebrew Bible mentions the land of Canaan and the Canaanite people more than 150 times. Biblical depictions of the Canaanites were usually derogatory, although their lives, beliefs in gods were much the same as those of all Near East peoples of the time. Canaanite history as portrayed in the Hebrew Bible was biased to fit the perceived narrative of Israelite history. The Canaanites are cast as idolatrous people with detestable practices who tempted the Israelites away from the religion of Moses. Now, the reality was much more complicated. The Canaanites were descended from Neolithic farmers who left the foothills of the Zagros Mountains, follow the red dot, through Iran, northern Persia, and southeast Turkey, and then slowly migrated down to the Levant, this green area, and down into Canaan. And that process started about 10,000 years ago. Archaeological data shows that the southern Levant was continuously populated for several millennia BC. Canaan was the land of Abraham, where he conducted his ministry. And the springtime of Abraham's revelation released its energy. Is it a coincidence that the assumed timeline of Abraham, which was about 1800 BC, and the Canaanite building cities from 1800 to 1550 BC, that featured massive construction for walls, palaces, and temples? A model of the Canaanite city, Lachish, is shown here. This growth indicated a thriving economy supported by trade routes. Whoever controlled the trade routes collected the tributes, tolls, taxes, and tariffs. Canaan also prospered by trading its oil, copper, wine, and grain on the routes. During these centuries, the land of Canaan prospered with relative autonomy and enjoyed the springtime and the summer of Abraham's dispensation, whether they believed in him or not. And of course, most of them didn't. On the left is a model of the Canaanite city of Megiddo. The ruler, the upper classes, soldiers, and merchants lived inside these walls. The farmers lived outside, as you can tell from the agricultural lands. On the right is the Canaanite altar found at the excavation of Megiddo. And I have been there and I have seen it. However, the Canaanite cities were never united. Kings who were more likely along the order of warlords ruled the villages and cities and small areas around them, called city-states, alternately fighting the other warlords and then making alliances with them to fight outsider threats such as the Ugarites. In today's Syria, the Hittites, in today's Turkey, and the Egyptians. The Canaanites in the Holy Land were not isolated culturally or religiously because of the trade routes. And these red lines are the trade routes. The Canaanites were exposed to people from all over the Near East, to their deities and religious rites, and to the cross currents of culture and communication, as well as trade. Most of the population was probably subsistence farmers, but collecting tolls from merchants on the trade routes was a financial and cultural bonanza. Then came conquest by the Egyptians about 1550 BC. The Egyptians made the Canaanites vassals and took over the trade routes, built fortresses, mansions, and agricultural estates from Gaza to Galilee, taking Canaan's finest products, copper, cedar from Lebanon, olive oil and wine from the Mediterranean coast, along with untold number of slaves and concubines, and sent them overland and across the Mediterranean and Red Seas to Egypt. Remember the collapse of the late Bronze Age empires and the collapse of the trade routes? Well, I'm never going to let you forget that in this series. The Egyptians withdrew from Canaan to defend their own countries against the Sea People's invasions, but that didn't help the Canaanites much. The Canaanites suffered greatly during the Bronze Age collapse, and the land was depopulated by about a third. The withdrawal of the Egyptian army and the sad condition of Canaan created a vacuum that made possible the Egyptian Hebrew migration to the Promised Land. Over the years, many Canaanites became Israelites and adopted the religion of Moses. Who are the Canaanites today? We've been talking about who the Canaanites were. Who are they today? A paper published by the journal Cell in 2020 reports that most modern Jewish groups and Arab-speaking groups from the region show at least half their ancestry is Canaanite. And the DNA of the Lebanese population today is 90% Canaanite. The descendants of Canaanites today are all monotheistic: Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Last week in the Exodus program, we discussed the necessity of Moses' teaching within the capacity and the limitations of the people, yet to push forward with a new dispensation. It worked. Jesus did not have to deal with polytheism and could fulfill Moses and teach the kingdom of God and the life everlasting. The end. And I have another very short video to share with you. In the meantime, please put your questions in the chat box, because that's the best place for us to get your questions. And we're on a strict schedule, so it does save a lot of time. And after this next video on monolatry, we will go to Q&A, okay? Okay, I think I need to go back to Zoom. And I think I need to hit share. Now I can bring it up. And now you can see it, correct? Yes, I think so.
Yes. Yes, we see it now. Thank you.
Okay. Monolatry. The ancient Near East was exclusively polytheistic. Mesopotamia alone had over 2,000 deities. The Canaanite, from whom the Hebrews emerged and into whose land the Egyptian Hebrews would return, had close to 300 deities. The religious shift from polytheism to monotheism took several centuries for the Hebrews to totally grasp that God is one. The transitional phase in this process was the worship of the Lord along with the worship of the Canaanite deities. This is called monolatry. Remember the 10 Commandments, thou shalt have no other gods before me? That's what this was all about, or what that was all about. The land of Canaan was mired in traditional polytheism and superstition. People believed that only a multitude of deities could handle all the tasks of Mother Nature: fertility, the protection of a village or cities, state. Just about anything could be credited to or blamed on the gods. The gods were worshipped to gain concessions, like plentiful rain for the crops, but not worshipped in terms of spiritual need or morality. The thought of one God to handle all of that was inconceivable. The deities were created from man's imagination in man's perceived self-image and given supernormal powers. But humanity had been created in God's image, and the task was for humanity to rediscover his own innate identity. Monotheism recognizes the one true God and denies the existence of other deities. Monolatry can mean either the exclusive worship of God without denying the existence of other deities, or worshiping God alongside other deities. The conventional belief has been that the Israelites were monotheists from the beginning, despite innumerable biblical references to their monolatrous worship and, at worst, their worship of idols. The problem of monolatry lasted among the Israelites for hundreds of years, despite the teachings of Abraham and Moses and the warnings of the Hebrew prophets. The Lord had said to Abraham, I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you, for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. Your God, singular. A small group, eventually known as Israel, emerged from its Canaanite roots to follow the teachings of Abraham. We all know the 10 Commandments that were given to Moses by God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. Okay, reading this, it is evident that the existence of polytheistic deities was not denied. What was forbidden was having any gods before the Lord God, making a bowing down to idols and worshiping any god other than the Lord. The admonitions against idol worship were numerous and absolute. Moses categorically and emphatically forbade idol worship when he proclaimed on behalf of the Lord, they must no longer offer any of their sacrifices to the goat idols, which they called demons, to whom they prostitute themselves. This is to be a lasting ordinance for them and for the generations to come. However, the lure of the Canaanite gods was strong. The Canaanites and the Israelites adopted aspects of each other's religion. Many Israelites assigned the Lord a position of one of the Canaanite gods. It would be a long process from monolatry to monotheism. The phrase, no other gods before me, in the first commandment opened the door to considering whether monolatry was part of God's plan to gradually strengthen monotheism. Here's one possible reason that Moses allowed for monolatry while absolutely prohibiting graven images. The explanation lies in all the manifestations of God having a twofold station, that of pure abstraction and that of distinction. One is the station of pure abstraction and essential unity, for they one and all summon the people of the earth to acknowledge the unity of God and herald unto them the Katha, the fountain in paradise, of an infinite grace and bounty. They are all invested with the robe of prophethood and honored with the mantle of glory. Each also had the station of distinction. A manifestation's individual distinction meant that his manifestation was tailored to the times and the people's level of understanding. Moses undoubtedly realized that polytheism would have to be gradually replaced with the concept of one God. Bahá'u'lláh stated, each manifestation of God hath a distinct individuality, a definitely prescribed mission, a predestined revelation, and specially designated limitations. Each one of them is known by a different name, is characterized by a special attribute, fulfills a definite mission, and is entrusted with a particular revelation. It would certainly have been a limitation for Moses that polytheism pervaded the land of Canaan. Speaking again of the revelations of God, Bahá'u'lláh wrote, "Know of a certainty that in every dispensation the light of divine revelation hath been vouchsafed unto men in direct proportions to their spirituality. And accordingly, they have invariably summoned the people to embrace the light of God through such means as best befitted the exigencies of the age in which they appeared. They were thus able to scatter the darkness of ignorance and to shed upon the world the glory of their own knowledge." The Jewish Virtual Library is the most comprehensive online resource for the Jewish religion, history, politics, and culture. It has an article that states the Mosaic religion starting as monolatrous. The Mosaic religion was initially a monolatrous religion. While the Hebrews are enjoined to worship no deity but Yahweh, there is no evidence that the earliest Mosaic religion denied the existence of other gods. In fact, the account of the migration contains numerous references by the historical characters to other gods. And the first law of the Decalogue is, after all, that no gods be put before Yahweh, not that no other gods exist. While controversial among many people, most scholars have concluded that the initial Mosaic religion for about 200 years was a monolatrous religion. Now, I would disagree here a bit and say that monolatry remained an issue within the Mosaic dispensation for several hundred years, as we shall see when we, well, in another series, reach the United Kingdom and the divided kingdom and the canonical prophets. The article continues, "Whatever the character of Mosaic religion during the occupation and the early monarchy, the prophets unambiguously made Yahweh the one and only God of the universe. Earlier Hebrews acknowledged and even worshiped foreign gods. The prophets, however, asserted that Yahweh ruled the entire universe and all the peoples in it, whether or not they recognized and worshiped Yahweh. The Yahweh religion as a monotheistic religion can really be dated to no earlier than the prophetic revolution. And by that, he means the Hebrew prophets. And what this article calls the prophetic revolution was actually the spiritual renewal through the Hebrew prophets. The first of the canonical Hebrew prophets were Amos and Hosea, who lived in the 8th century. And the last of the 15 or so Hebrew prophets was Malachi in the 5th century BC. All of them condemned idolatry and the worship of false gods. Through the prophets, we know that monolatry was a major problem for several centuries. For example, the prophet Jeremiah, who witnessed the Babylonian defeat of Jerusalem and the exile, had denounced idol worship over and over and over again. Speaking through the voice of God, he said, "The people in Judah have done evil in my eyes, declares the Lord. They have set up their detestable idols in the house that bears my name and have defiled it." Now, when the Babylonians defeated Jerusalem, the Babylonian exile began to Babylon, where many Hebrews were sent, or Israelites. The exile helped many Hebrews realize that their one God was different, that they were still his people, no matter where they were. That was a groundbreaking realization in religious consciousness. Even so, monolatry lessened, but persisted even after the return to Jerusalem, which was called the Restoration. Monotheism did emerge triumphant in Judaism. For the first time in Near Eastern history, a people were raised out of polytheism and into monotheism. This breakthrough is in many ways the essence of the Hebrew Bible. Okay, Q&A, chat. Do we have any questions? I don't think so. If you would like, are there any short questions that we can answer for you?
Friends, this would be the time to either unmute yourselves or start your videos so that we can see you, and if you have anything to provide. Thank you.
Can I just ask, did the Essenes exist already? I know John the Baptist was an Essene, but was that an early? No.
No. The Essenes and the Sadducees and the Pharisees and those other sects of the priesthood came much later, and they're relevant in the Gospels, but no, not at this time. But thanks for asking. Any other questions before we turn this over to Peter? And we'll have another Q&A after Peter's presentation. So you can also ask questions and post.
And Eileen will be participating in that one too. So, you know, it may be that over the course of my presentation, you'll ask questions not just pertaining to what I say, but even if it's not pertaining to what I say, it might relate back to what she presented. In any case, we're very informal about this. We're team teachers, by the way. It's not like we're two people who have hermetically sealed material. And so, you know, that she only responds to her questions. I only respond to my questions. No, we really want to. This is a brand new experiment, by the way. We've neither of us have ever done this before, and we're having a ball. We're really having a good time, and I think one of the reasons why we're having such a great time is because we are coming to this question, to this study from very different perspectives. In fact, I think to give you a little eye opener here, a little snapshot into the future, we're enjoying this so much that we're in the process of organizing formal courses that we want to start offering, starting probably in the spring, that will go into these questions in much more depth and will require lots of reading. Because, you know, at this point, we've done all the work, and we love doing the work, but we want you to also participate in the work, because boy, once you actually study these texts for yourself, that's where you get hooked, totally hooked. And also that's where you learn how to find things for yourselves. And this has been the number one obstacle for people in the study of religion for millennia, is that the people who knew how to find the teachings and the history of the religion were this small little cadre of people who made their living off of having that knowledge. And thanks be to God, Bahá'u'lláh has liberated us from that paradigm. It's interesting because it's actually quite similar to the Protestant idea, to the original idea of the Reformers, who were later called Protestants, which is not very nice because it means they're protesting against what was happening, when really what they were calling for was a reform in Christianity. But really what was most new about the Protestants is that they wanted to get people to read the Bible, read it for yourself. And that's why when Luther translated the whole Bible into German, it had such a huge impact. Prior to that, you'd have people who translated into English who were persecuted because of that. The complete control over biblical knowledge, over the reading of the Bible, was maintained by the Roman Catholic Church for all of Western Europe for a very long time. And it was done very simply by having one translation into Latin made by Jerome, and people were not taught Latin. And so how were they supposed to read the Bible for themselves? The only people taught Latin were the people who were going into the vocation of actually being in the field of religious studies, which was not, of course, academic religious studies. This was church religious studies, and you had to adhere to all of the dogmas of the church, all the rituals of the church, everything that the church had formulated over the course of well over 1,000 years, and that persists to this day. And we are possessed of the same church. And in fact, the Protestant churches have, for the most part, formed themselves in imitation of the Roman Catholic model, so that they are firmly controlled by their religious professionals, by their class of experts. And this is true also, of course, of the Eastern Orthodox Church and virtually of all the churches. There are very few churches that don't have a clergy that are really the people of power and influence. And so we need to really make the very most of our freedom to investigate reality for ourselves by reading the scriptures for ourselves, because having knowledge of scripture is really indispensable for understanding what we're here for and what we need to do with our lives. And we cannot have that understanding unless we study the text for ourselves. And we're going at it gradually, of course, but it's a good sign that more and more people are doing this, are going beyond what people did in my generation. So many of the Baha'is, once they became Baha'is, they didn't do any reading or hardly any reading. They figured, well, now I have to get on with my life. But really, this is part of our life, is studying the scriptures. You know, in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, Baha'u'lláh says that we are to read the writings every morning and every evening. Well, that's a practice that's been carried out by people in all religions prior to us. So it's entirely understandable that we'd have to do it. But it doesn't apply to a clergy, a special class of people, because we don't have any. So that means all of us. That's all of us are supposed to do that. And that's the only way that you have a prayer of being able to read this vast literature, which for us is not just our scriptures, it's the scriptures that have come down to us through all of the manifestations of God. It's an enormous library, but we're a lot smarter and more capable of understanding than we think we are. There's a beautiful statement in the writings about saying that the children, the Baha'i children, will soon manifest a greater capacity to learn and understand than adults. And that's not sort of, we should not take that lightly. We should understand that there is a massive transformation of consciousness that is in the process of happening. And as amazed as we are at AI and in all kinds of technological developments, it's the ones in human consciousness that are the most exciting, and that bode that are the most how shall I say, reaffirming of the purpose of humanity. After all, we're not looking to have everything taken over by machines. We created the machines. That's how smart we are, and God has complete confidence that we will use that intelligence to create the kind of society that we've been dreaming of for as long as we have recorded history. Now I'm going to jump in, okay? And I'm going to jump in. I'm going to move very fast, but I'm going to try not to, overwhelm or make you feel as if you're on a roller coaster. And I want to, preface this by saying that this is just a very, very brief summary of the subject that we're studying. Now, what am I talking about? I'm talking about what I want to do today is I want to cover a huge amount of material that I haven't covered previously, partly because I had a bad cold and couldn't talk very well. I actually had to cancel one of the sessions because of that, and because that cold kind of lingered, and also just because it's very easy to get behind when you're covering so much material. So here's what I want to introduce to you. First of all, a very brief review of what we did in the previous week. We talked about Adam. Who is Adam? What is the meaning of the word Adam in the Bible? What is the meaning, and what are the references to Adam in the Quran, in the Bahá'í writings, including the writings of Bahá'u'lláh? We talked about Cain and Abel very briefly, and mostly because those two individuals, those two sons of Adam, are not discussed much in Bahá'í literature, at least that's been translated. But Cain and Abel actually are important characters for us to be familiar with, both in the Jewish sources, in Genesis, and also in the Quran. And then we talked about Enoch, and we talked about Enoch briefly, not only in the Bible, excuse me, where there are only two very brief references to Enoch in the Bible, but more importantly in the Quran, where Enoch is called Idris, and in the Baha'i literature, which has many, many references to what Jewish, Christian, and Muslim theologians and philosophers have written about for a period of many centuries. So we talked about that very briefly. We talked briefly about Noah and about the sons of Noah and the covenant of Noah. In a sense that with Noah came a new creation, because the previous creation was destroyed, and which is full of symbolic meaning from a Baha'i perspective, because this is what happens with every manifestation. With every new manifestation, there is a new age, there is in effect a new heaven and a new earth, a new creation, and an opportunity for humanity to grow exponentially based upon the teachings of the manifestation who has revealed himself at that time. So we have Noah, and then there are many, many references to Noah in the Quran, and important ones in the Gospels, statements which we only very lightly touched upon, but again, in a real course on this subject, that we'd go into the actual sources and read them carefully and discuss them. And then finally, we concluded with the Tower of Babel and how that is referred to in the Jewish, the Islamic, and also the Baha'i sources. So that was last week. And this week, I'm going to be focusing on the following. I'm going to be talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Ishmael, two of his sons. Also, then the next generation, which are the two sons of Isaac, Jacob and Esau, and then down the line, looking at the sons of Jacob. Now, which were 12 sons, and those 12 sons give us the idea of the 12 tribes of Israel, because the tribes are the descendants of each of the sons. And the primary son, or the son that really shines forth in many ways in the Bible and also in the Quran and the Baha'i writings, is Joseph. So we're going to go rapidly through this content. And so if you find that that you have many questions, I will completely understand, because I'm not going to cover all the details of each one of them. Now, Abraham is depicted largely in the book of Genesis in chapters 11 through 25, and in the Quran in 25 of the chapters of the Quran, and 69 times in 63 verses. And there are so many references to Abraham that to try to introduce that subject in a few minutes is really not doing the topic justice at all. So that will, in-depth study of who Abraham is in the Quran will have to wait. And but I think it's important for us to understand that there's a continuity between the Bible witness to Abraham that we find in Genesis, and the Abraham who is referred to in the Gospels, who is referred to in the Quran, and is referred in the writings of Bahá'u'lláh, in the Kitab-i-Iqan, in Gleanings, in the Tabernacle of Unity by Abdu'l-Bahá, and Some Answered Questions, in Light of the World, in selections from the writings of Abdu'l-Bahá, and in 12 table talks of Abdu'l-Bahá, and of course in the Promulgation of Universal Peace. In other words, there's a whole lot of material on Abraham. And Abraham comes across as a very seminal character for all of humanity, and not just for the specific inheritance that has come down to this day to be regarded as Jewish. And so it's very important to have an in-depth study of Abraham to understand how we're all connected. Just as it's important to understand Noah for the same reason. We're all connected to Noah because we're all descendants of Noah's family, because there weren't any people after, besides them who survived the deluge. These are, of course, tremendous symbols. What are they symbols of? They're symbols of our unity. The fact that mankind is really one. And they're the repeated symbolism that's affirming the oneness of our existence, and the fact that we need to come together to understand that and not regard ourselves as being in some fundamental way separate and different. Our differences are there, but they should not be the cause of disunity, of war, and of deep misunderstanding. Our differences should be celebrated. We should be having fun with them rather than them being the cause of mutual hatred and distrust. So briefly, now we have two very important sons, not the only sons. Remember, Abraham had three wives. I mean, he had three people with whom he had children, okay? He had, number one, his wife Sarai, He had number two, Hagar, who was her servant, let's put it that way, his servant, who had one child with him. And yes, and he had one child with his first wife, with Sarah. And then he had a third wife named Keturah. And he had multiple sons with Keturah and other children. So we're not going to go into that, but if any of you have done some reading on the heritage of Bahá'u'lláh, then you know that Bahá'u'lláh is descended from Sarah, in other words, from Isaac, son of Sarah, and also from Keturah, his third wife. And there are plentiful references to that in the Baha'i literature, starting, I believe, from Mirza Abul Fazl Qurpagani, who was the first one who did a very systematic study of the heritage of Baha'u'lláh, and therefore the fulfillment of many, many prophecies in scripture because of that heritage. So then now we go to, briefly, we introduce Isaac, who's called Yitzchak in Hebrew, and Isaac or Isaac in Arabic. And Isaac is found, of course, in the book of Genesis, also found in plenteous references to Isaac in the Quran, and of course some references as well in the Bible, in the Baha'i writings. And the same thing with Ishmael. Also, Ishmael is talked about very openly in many references in the Bible, also found in the Quran, also found in the Baha'i writings. And to give you a summary of those, because to do a thorough study of them again would take us quite a bit more time than we have. It's important that we understand that the Quran, in their discussion of Isaac and Ishmael, both Isaac and Ishmael, do not in any way buy into the anti-Semitic ideologies that have existed in Europe, in the Middle East, in other parts of the world. They do not make any derogatory statements about these descendants of Abraham. In other words, they do not depict Isaac because he was the progenitor, of the Jewish people ultimately, or Ishmael, who is the progenitor of the Arab people. It does not depict them as less than equal with each other. They are both treated with tremendous dignity and respect. They are both indicated to be prophets of God. And there is no hint of this anti-Semitic attitude in the Quran, and there is also no hint of it in what we would call the really reliable literature of either Islam or, for that matter, Judaism. What has sometimes clouded the issue having to do with Isaac and Ishmael is that people have not understood what they're reading. And there are reasons for that. And the reasons are principally that the religious authorities who are responsible for communicating the meaning of Scripture have found that it is in their best interests to interpret it in ways that enhance their authority and that promote their power. And as we know, religious officials and leaders have been closely associated with empire building and empire preserving for many, many thousands of years. And this was, you may recall the strong statements contrary to the magicians who were in the court of Pharaoh, for example, and the magicians that are depicted in other courts that are I mean, in the courts of the monarchies of the various pagan countries that were depicted in Scripture. In the book of Esther, for example, in the book in references to Nebuchadnezzar and to many others. So these were depicted very honestly in a way that we could see that they're there for the power, they're there for the money, they're there to control things. And this was, of course, the model that was picked up by religions and has been very consistently done from ever since, in every religion. And so let's get to Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau were two sons of Isaac, and they are also depicted in the Quran and in the Baha'i writings, although with quite some brevity, because they're not as important as Joseph and his brothers. Now, the 12 sons of Jacob end up being extremely important because they are, for two reasons principally. One is that the 12 are the inheritors of the land of Israel. And so the whole context of the story of being exiled in Egypt and then going back to their homeland in the land of Canaan this is a story that is all about 12 tribes, about 12 brothers and their descendants, and what happened to them when they were on the way and what happened to them when they actually arrived in their promised land, and how they comported themselves, how they behaved themselves once they were there. And so this is one theme. Another major theme here is Joseph. Joseph, the story of Joseph has been appreciated by many readers to be one of the most moving stories in the entire Torah, the entire Pentateuch. It's a story that speaks to everybody because of many of its characteristics. And we won't go into it here because I think anybody who's read that story understands what I'm talking about. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it that you do so. Joseph was completely apart from his other brothers in a lot of respects. And one of the things that we find in Christian literature, in Islamic literature, and in the Baha'i writings is that Joseph is the symbol of the manifestation of God. He's a symbol of a loving relationship between God and humanity through this ideal person, this person who surprises everybody with how wonderful he is, and how forgiving and how merciful and how loving he is under all circumstances, and a truly extraordinary characteristic. And in fact, many Christians saw that Jesus was Joseph. You know, they had the same characteristics as each other. Now, because of our time constraints, I want now to make a transition. How was it that the Israelites, these brothers of Joseph, we know how Joseph got to Egypt, right? Everybody knows that story. Same story in the Quran, same story is referred to in the Baha'i writings. The story is that the other brothers ganged up, with the exception of one who was too young to take part in that nonsense. His name was Benjamin. He was too young. But the other ones, they ganged up together and they decided, this brother's taking too much attention. We don't like, the influence he's got over daddy. He's going to get all the inheritance if he keeps this up. No, we don't like this at all. We're just going to get rid of him, okay? So they dump him in a pit and think, well, we don't care what happens to him. He'll probably starve to death. If he doesn't, there was another story which he was sold into slavery. Whether he was left in a pit or whether he was sold into slavery, the idea is basically we got rid of him, okay? he's a threat to us. He's gone. All right. And so he is taken to Egypt. And in Egypt, he becomes a servant to a family. And through various extraordinary stories, all of which depict his character. Every single one of these stories are talking about this miraculous character of Joseph and how he turns every situation into gold. He's like, talk about magic. He's got the divine magic. And one of his special gifts is that he can interpret dreams. And we need to understand this. This is not divination. This is not some esoteric skill that you learn from people who are like teaching you how to do the black arts or the white arts or something. No, it has nothing to do with that. This is a gift from God. He can understand dreams because God reveals their meaning to him. This is a sign of prophethood. And indeed, even though Joseph is not called a prophet anywhere in the Torah, in the Pentateuch, he is depicted in such manner that what else could he be? And the Quran calls Joseph a prophet. And the Baha'i writings call Joseph a prophet. Very important for us to understand. So how do we get there? We get there because there's a famine. There's a famine in the land of Israel, in the land of Canaan. And the other sons of Jacob and Jacob himself are very concerned about this. They can't feed themselves. So the message gets to Joseph, and it's a long story, but in effect, one of the benefits that they derive, the other brothers of Joseph, from going to Egypt and asking for permission to emigrate so that they can save themselves from starvation, is that Joseph forgives them because Joseph is in charge. He's running the show. The Pharaoh has complete confidence in him, and he's delegated all authority to management of his entire realm to Joseph. Joseph forgives his brothers and welcomes them to come to the land of Egypt, and where they could seek refuge because there's plenty of food in Egypt. There's plenty of sustenance there, and they reside there for quite some time. And then we know the story that eventually the pharaohs who are running the country do not have no memory of Joseph. They have no memory of how it came to be that these people who are working out here in whatever capacity, but are not natives to Egypt, how they happen to be there. And eventually, because this memory is forgotten, is lost, but also because you have pharaohs now that want a different degree of control. They simply want things to go their way, and they don't. And these people that came from outside of the country are doing really wonderful work, and they're very prosperous. They're doing extremely well, and this was to happen many times over with the people from this lineage, is that they would excel at whatever they do, and then they become the object of hatred of those people who are jealous and want to have more, but they don't want to work that hard. So what you have is, we know now how they got to Egypt, and then we know how they left. They left because they were called upon to leave by God. Moses received a message. He received a message that it was time for the people to leave. And the same message is reported in the Bible, in the Quran, in the Babi and Baha'i writings. It's very consistent that this was a call from God. This is not a rebellion, or it's not and they're not running away. They're not breaking any laws. They left because they were told in divine revelation, it is time for you to go back to your homeland. So Moses is a very, very important character also for us to understand, because Moses is, he did lots of things that would have been scandalous for people in later epochs, both Jews and Christians, or Muslims for that matter. For example, he married a woman who wasn't of his background, Zipporah. She was not Jewish, right? Well, of course she wasn't Jewish, but she wasn't Israelite, right? She did not come from the tribe, any of those tribes. And it didn't matter. That's his wife. And, he never divorced her. He was faithful to her. And then he has two siblings that are talked about in scriptures. Again, they're talked about in Genesis, they're talked about in the Quran, and also in the Bahá'í and Bahá'í writings. And those siblings are Aaron and Miriam. And Aaron and Miriam are depicted in quite some detail. Very, very interesting characters, because while Moses was the only prophet in the family, he appoints Aaron to become the person in charge of the worship of God. He said, this people needs to have somebody who is in charge of worship, because it's a big job, and that job needs to be handled by somebody and in perpetuity. And so Aaron is made the father of the Kohanim, the priests, and all priests, all members of the Kohanim to this day are descendants of Aaron. This gets very interesting when you study the New Testament, because Mary was the daughter of a Kohen. She was a descendant, and this actually taps into various prophecies that the promised one, the Mashiach, the Messiah of the Israelite people, was going to be a descendant of Aaron. So you have Aaron. There's a great deal of material, of course, in the remaining books of the Torah, of the Pentateuch, about worship and all the different regulations related to worship. And those pertain to the job of Aaron and of the Kohanim. That was their job. Okay. And they, by the way, they had they had a whole group of helpers, and those helpers were descendants of a brother of Joseph named Levi or Levi. And the Levites that was their job, was to be assistants to the Kohanim. So you have a whole structure that's developing in the midst of the desert before they actually end up in their promised land. And this structure is described in enormous detail, which of course couldn't have been done on site in the desert. This would have been written down over a long period of time as it was manifested in people's actual lives. So you have this structure, and the structure still exists in many specific remnants. For example, there are families still in the world who know that they are descended from Levi. They're Levites. And so that's quite extraordinary when you think of that continuity, how long this relationship has existed. Miriam is called a prophetess. And as a prophetess, she is leading the women in particular to celebrate their liberation from Egyptian confinement and slavery, but also much more important, the great joy of being on the road back to their promised land. The symbolism here is just, it's absolutely extraordinary because it pertains, even though it's about a specific people in a specific time and place, it's really about us all. And how do we learn this? We learn this by seeing how this scenario, this story, and these themes are explored in the writings of Baha'u'lláh. Baha'u'lláh takes the symbolism and makes it global. He makes it global, and he says, this is a process this process of liberation and of reaching our full potential is a process that will take place over the course of at least 500,000 years. And I'm not making that up, friends. 500,000 years is specifically mentioned in the writings of Baha'u'lláh. This is the period of time that humanity is going to come to its full maturity. And that is directly related to the symbolism of this tremendous liberation and returning home, because it is very much a returning home. We are going back to our origins at the same time as we're moving on to something that is brand new, because those two things are not opposites. They're complementary conceptions of the same phenomenon. So I'm going to leave it there and say that I'm going to make available before the end of our series of presentations, I'm going to make available to you my full notes on these subjects, so that you would have the opportunity to do extra reading for yourself on each one of them. And also, because I will certainly be using most of those references as part of the reading for the course that we'll be offering at some point, and hopefully soon in the future. So my comments, my words are concluded for today, and now I'm looking forward to hearing from you, and also in response to your questions, to hearing from Eileen.
Yes. I'm trying to get there. Here I am. Just a second. What I am doing is I have just put Peter's email address in the chat, and I'm putting my own also in the chat so that you can write to us if you wish, especially if you want to get Peter's note that he mentioned. We also have a weekly newsletter, and I sent the notes out last week in the weekly newsletter. So if you would like to receive the newsletter, please send me an email and I will be glad to put you on the list. Okay, moving back, we do have some questions. Thank you, several people, for your warm comments. What makes modern people capable of embracing more information compared to the past? Well, it's because of our level of literacy. It's difficult to really comprehend, but the vast majority of people were not literate until very recently in history, like a couple hundred years ago, or even 300 years ago. That develops capacity, because if you're literate, you learn. And of course, nowadays, it's the internet. We can learn and learn and learn and learn. And it's just incredibly amazing what we can learn. When did
May I say something?
go? Yes, go right ahead.
Okay. Occasionally I mute and I touch these muting buttons because I still have remnants of an awful cough, and it makes a huge racket when I cough. So I don't want you to have to be subjected to that. So yes, I wanted to point out that just in my lifetime, technology has made research that much more, infinitely more accessible. The resources that are now available totally for free, beautifully designed for us, not for somebody else, for me. I can do word searches, I can do subject searches, I can find something in the original language with a parallel translation. I can find all kinds of ways to look up a word in another language and find out what it really meant in different contexts. All of these things do not require a library. They do not require proximity to a library. They do not require that you're doing a graduate degree. And so somebody tells you, and I remember this very keenly because I started a PhD in Islamic studies back in 1978. And I went to the library of the University of Chicago, and I was introduced to resources I'd never seen before in my life. It was like, remember that story of Ali Baba's cave and the infinite riches that were open to you when you said, "Open sesame," the doors opened, and then all of these riches. That's how I felt when I was at the University of Chicago. I felt like I had no idea that this huge wealth of information was accessible to me, and I know where to find everything because they explain. Nowadays, I've got a library far greater than that at the University of Chicago. It's at my fingertips. I can access it anytime I want. And now with the new capacities of AI, I don't have to worry about knowing 20 languages, let alone thousands of languages that actually exist. I could just operate in English and translate anything into my own language. And all of this is made because of the ingenuity of the human mind. That's why we have the internet. It didn't come out of somewhere else. It came out of us. So when we consider this really central teaching of the first chapter of Genesis, we are created in the image and likeness of God. Wow. I don't know that we've ever had in history a more clear evidence of the truth of that statement than the time in which we live. What human beings are now finding through their own efforts is absolutely beyond the comprehension of people even a century ago. Even me, I can't believe the new stuff that's happening all the time. No? So I think this is really important for us to understand what's available to us, and that it's expanding at such a rapid rate. And this doesn't have to wait for some future generation either. that's another thing that I hope that people can take some encouragement from, is that, we're not spring chickens. Eileen and I, we've been over the hill a few times, right? But we can do this. We can do this. So just imagine what our kids and grandkids can do. It's beyond, I get so excited about this because I see the tremendous potentiality for human consciousness to be expanded beyond anything we could have dreamed of a century ago. You think about, what did it take for somebody to have really comprehensive knowledge in any field? It took years and years of careful studying of books. Nowadays, you can do it in a few seconds. I mean, really, you can. Now, you still have to acquire judgment. You have to pay very close attention to the reliability of the sources that you're consulting. Don't believe anything, everything that you read. But that's always been the case. That's just having discernment, developing discernment has always been an important attribute, and it continues to be one. So I just want to say, I think the evidences of modern people, of our contemporaries, being able to understand better and to acquire more information, they're all around us. And if you're not seeing them, it may be because you're not filtering, because you have to filter, because there's a whole lot of other stuff out there that is going to distract you from seeing the fact that what you really wanted is at your fingertips. It's right there, right in front of you.
How true. Absolutely. I could never have written my books and prepared these programs without the internet. And that is the honest truth. It would have been absolutely impossible for me, without a PhD, to have gone into this kind of research without the internet. Okay, we have a question. When did people really have a stronger grasp of the idea of one God? And what do you understand brought this about? Okay. As far as the Hebrews go, it was a long evolutionary process. A few of them had no problem. Others had to learn the hard way. And actually, this is a problem. Here, I'm going to go off on a tangent that means a lot to me because I'm so concerned about it. We have a problem today with polytheism and monolatry. Who are our gods really? And I'm talking about the general population. In other words, where do we put our time? Social media? Shopping at the mall? Whatever. We also have a major problem in this country with atheism. And I think it's like we're going to have to relearn the process over and over and over again. Now, next week, excuse me. There. Next week, I'm going to be talking about Leviticus and the blessings and the curses. The blessings if we obey God, the curses if we do not. And if anything applies to our times today, it's that section of Leviticus, and also it's in Deuteronomy, which will be covered in our last and 8th session. And then you also have to stop and think, well, what is the one God? And does this one God who created everything, does this one God really care about me? Yes. And it's beyond our understanding how, but yes, God does. And the recognition of all of this, it comes very gradually through societies. And sometimes it comes very gradually through individuals. And if they don't get it in this lifetime, trust me, they will get it in the next. Okay, let's see what else I hope that answered your question, Lucinda.
Yeah, I'll just say a couple words about that to my friend Lucinda,
Thank you.
who I am delighted to see again after we've studied a number of things together through Clearwater. This has been a gradual process, and it's been a very often you get sort of this idea when you read scripture that everything happened really quickly because you'd have certain things would be revealed to a particular individual, like to Abraham or to Isaac or to Moses. And you'd think, oh, well, that means that everybody else got it. No, they didn't, actually. What happened was the prophet of God got it, okay? And then because of that, and because somebody wrote down that revelation occurred and the particular context of it, but we have no idea in most cases what the response of the people was to the manifestation. And one of the things, and every once in a while you get a taste of it, and that taste is not a particularly happy making moment. For example, what Moses goes up the mountain to receive a revelation from God, and when he comes down, what are the people doing? They're worshiping a golden calf. Hello! How is this possible? Okay, but this is, we're going to get to this next week and that thereafter. But this is humanity. This is what we do. We mess up, and we mess up under the most perfect circumstances. I mean, just go back to the Garden of Eden. Look, all these fantastic fruits and vegetables to eat and the perfect environment, but just don't touch that one, okay? And then what do? They go and touch the one they're not supposed to do. Don't our children do this? Don't our grandchildren do? It's a human attribute that we want to try everything for ourselves, as if, it doesn't matter if God tells me not to do it, whatever, I still want to try it, right? But I think one of the answers I have to this question is that we've never had a stronger opportunity to recognize God than is occurring now. And the reason why I would say that is the case is because those ideologies that have rejected God have proven themselves to be so totally contrary to human good. You think about Marxism, you think about all of the different kinds of influences of Marxist thinking on the world. The damage that Marxism has done, and atheism applied to a societal principle or organizing people, the damage that has been done is just absolutely beyond calculation. I mean, we know, for example, that when Mao led this cleansing in China, we know that something around 100 million people were killed. And they've lost estimates on how many people were killed during the Russian Revolution. And we could go on and on. the human ideologies create enmity, and enmity leads to war and to killing. And that's the proof to me that there is God has become more and more clear all the time. And because of the fact that when you consider the alternative, it doesn't make sense. And I think that this is becoming acknowledged even by people who strongly embraced a completely non-religious point of view because of their work or because of their family and background or whatever. But nowadays, because of this enormous freedom and opportunity to share ideas with people, is that people are changing. People can spend their entire lives immersed in a materialistic point of view, and something happens and they completely change overnight. And that's, to me, like the saving grace for all of us, is that we have that potential. You know, Baha'u'lláh says in the Kitab Yagan that we have it at the moment of death. At the very moment of death, we have the opportunity to wake up and see and smell the coffee. All right. And so I can't be down in the dumps when I look at the world, even though there's unprecedented madness going on. Also, there's unprecedented opportunity for us to wake up and see reality and see that it is good. You know, as it's said in Genesis, God created this and it was good. All of it's good. All of the creation of God is good. And so I think we have to not just be concerned about this in the past, but to understand that recognizing the real influence of God in our lives in the present and what will happen in the future, this is our salvation, is to recognize that it's happening now and it will continue to happen. There's no, as the Bob put it, all are his servants and all abide by his bidding.
Exactly. And I think our last question, unless someone posts another one from Peter Burns, was Egypt or other countries near Israel, did they accept the teaching of the Old Testament? Well, the short answer is no, not until Christianity spread it. However, if you read the short story of Jonah in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, and I think it's in volume 1 of my trilogy, maybe volume 2, I forget. Anyway, Jonah, who was swallowed by a big fish, not a whale, a big fish, because he didn't want to do what God told him to do, which was to go teach the people in Mesopotamia. And I'm taking this out of my head, so the details are not there. But Jonah went in the opposite direction. No way was he going to do that. And so he boarded a ship. The ship was on the verge of being shipwrecked. The crew asked him, "Is this your doing?" And he said yes. And he got thrown overboard, swallowed by the fish, regurgitated on the shore, went to where God had told him to go. And now the interesting thing is, it doesn't say so much about what he taught them, although I'm assuming that monotheism was definitely part of it. He found the people extremely receptive. Extremely. And this made Jonah mad. And he went into a big sulk. oh God, they should have been punished for their wrongdoing. How come you're forgiving them? And on and on and on. And that just raises the question. Now, Jonah did his job. The people were very receptive. Why was God doing things the hard way by sending his messengers into the land of Canaan? Abraham, Moses, Jesus. Maybe it was because if the Canaanite Hebrews could be converted, anybody could be. It's like he started with the most difficult people. And over again, you hear the expressions in the Hebrew Bible, stiff-necked, stiff-necked. And Jeremiah, the prophet, who is actually my favorite, said over and over again, they would not listen. They would not listen. They do not listen. I'm just raising this as kind of an interesting take on why the surrounding peoples might have been receptive, but they weren't given the bounty of these dispensations until Christianity spread out in circles and took the Old Testament with them. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and just
Yeah, thank you.
to add my
Thank you, Eileen.
so Peter to add my 2 cents. If you read in the Advent of Divine Justice, the Guardian reminds us that the manifestations of God are not sent to the most deserving, the most virtuous, the smartest, the nicest, and cutest people. No, that's not the plan of God. God sends them to the people at the very bottom of the bill of the whatever, but at the ones who need it the most. Those are the ones that get it. This is, and we should realize that this is how Jesus operated. This is how all the manifestations operated. They reached out to the people who needed their guidance, this guidance from God the most. And when they do, when somebody pays attention to them and says, you're really in a bad place, you need some help, their receptivity can be much greater than those who seem to have already answered life's questions for themselves. Now, it means that we have to do something that's very uncomfortable. We have to let down our standards to the extent that we actually mingle with people that normally we'd want to avoid. But no, it challenges us to do that, but we're doing it for the God. For doing it for God, we're doing it to carry out God's calling to transform humanity. And but then always we have to remember that the reason why the people of Israel were chosen is not because they were the best. They were chosen because they were the worst. And so, our admiration, and many of us have tremendous admiration for Jews in our lives. That admiration must be for what they have achieved because of the revelation of God, not because inherently in themselves they became successful, because that isn't true. They didn't. They became successful because they were transformed by the power of God's revelation.
Thank you. Right on. And another thought just strongly crossed my mind. when this country, the Baha'is in this country, were told that we would lead the world spiritually. And then you look at the amorality in this country. You think, how in the world could that ever be? And I think it's maybe, speaking extemporaneously, maybe it's an example of some of the world's most lost people giving an opportunity to turn around and become beacons of spirituality for the rest of the world. Maybe. Thank you for nodding. At least one person agreed. That just came to me.
Well,
and
no, what you said is that's what the Guardian said in the advent of divine justice. He said the same thing. He told the story about the manifestations choosing the most debased of all people to reveal himself to. And he compared that with why was America chosen to be the hub of the administrative order. That's why he said, you don't think you've been chosen because you're, the hot tamale. No way. You're chosen because you have to show that you can be changed by the revelation, and that power will be manifested in you.
Yes, of course.
It's all about God.
Yes, the advent of divine justice. I read it recently, and that's where it bubbled up, and I just couldn't identify.
Exactly.
Yes. Would anybody else like to join this free-for-all? Just speak up. Maybe here's something. The law of reversal. This is from Sharon Leonard. The law of reversal. In this day, they that are last shall be first, they that are first shall be last. One of many identifiers of a bottom-up organic awakening of humanity's maturity is day that will not be followed by night. Thank you.
So I don't see any other questions either on social media or comments. I mean, there's comments. They're basically thank you to both Peter Terry and Eileen Maddocks for what you guys have put together. And I think now would be a good time to go ahead and stop with the program today, unless you have any last minute thoughts.
I wanted to recommend that. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
I have a last minute thought. When we said that the day that will not be followed by night, would you mind commenting on what you think the meaning of that is, please? Thank you.
Okay, I think I can take this, Peter, and then you can follow if I don't do it right. I believe this is a reference to the spiritual seasons. Whenever a revelation comes, you have the spiritual springtime, and then you have the spiritual summer of the maturing of that revelation, and then you have the fall, the autumn, when people forget the original teachings and the corruption and perversions creep in, and then you have the winter, which is the deadness of that revelation, and a new revelation is sent. I believe that refers to the Baha'i faith will not be followed by a fall and a winter. Peter, can you add to that?
That's my understanding at this time, this is a theme that is really mind-blowing, if I may use colloquialism. When Baha'u'lláh speaks that the cycle of fulfillment, the coming age of humanity, that this is a process that has started already, and it's going to last 500,000 years, then it does seem that when he says this day will not be followed by night, he's talking about this dispensation, his dispensation. So his dispensation is going to lead to the next manifestation and the many that will follow him, operating under the shadow of his revelation. They will never fall out from that shadow, and that we will never see a turning away. I mean, essentially what has held us back in our development as a species is that every single time a new manifestation appears, we pretty much start from scratch, because the influence of the previous manifestation didn't do the job, because people weren't listening and they didn't implement the teachings. So then a new manifestation comes, and then we get another chance. But this is where we've entered a whole new era. In this new era, we're seeing fulfillment. That's the promise. We are at the promised day. There is no other promised day. And that promised day in this context is a cycle. It's a cycle that lasts 500,000 years. And so no matter, we shouldn't interpret any kind of negative phenomenon that we see in our own time as indicating that we're not going to attain that promised goal. No, it's happening. It's happening. It's already happened. Sure. You know, sometime people in the future will look at the time we're living through and they'll say the signs of the coming of the unification of mankind are all over the place. How could those people be complaining all the time? And I think really that's true. That's true. Even though, yes, we see the signs of the old culture falling apart, and of all of the weaknesses in that old culture becoming really obvious to everybody. But the power of this new creative energy is just way beyond anything we've seen before in history. And it's growing at an exponential rate. And you know, that's how I see things. And because I see things that way, then I try to look at every problematic situation and say, well, how can we help that situation to turn around and to yield fruit, rather than seeing it at, no, this kind of opposition could actually kill us, could actually drown us, could end up in another deluge. It's like, no, that's not happening. That's not happening. You know, we're not going to have, you know, even though it looks like disaster could happen at any moment, instead, because the day will not be followed by night, that is a promise of Baha'u'lláh that's unequivocal. And it means that we're only on the up and up, and we've got to build on the tremendous release of energy that's happened, and not and you know, and that's a hard thing. It certainly happens to me all the time, that I think that something will happen either within the Baha'i community or outside of the Baha'i community, and I get really down and out and think, well, how are we going to improve ourselves from this point on? But it's all there. we have to go looking for it, and we have to help each other, because, you know, who else is going to help us but us? Us and God. That's it.
I think that's a good place to stop for today. So this was session number 5, correct, Eileen? I believe so. We have 3
Yes.
more after this one. And
Yes.
I would just like to thank you and Peter for your time, and to thank everyone who's participated both here in the Zoom and online. You know, everyone's participation is what really helps to make these things as enjoyable and as thought-provoking as they are. So we really appreciate everyone joining, and we look forward to seeing everyone join us next week.